It was a warm, sunny afternoon in London, and Maria was excited. She had traveled all the way from her hometown, eager to explore the famous sights of the city. The streets were lively, full of people from all over the world, each enjoying the beauty and history of this incredible place. Maria couldn't wait to take it all in. She was in a group of friends, all ready to make memories. They had planned this trip for months, talking about the famous landmarks, the Big Ben clock tower, the London Eye, and of course, the palace. They had made sure to book tickets for the main attractions, but Maria was more excited about just wandering around, letting the adventure unfold. As they walked along the bustling streets, the group decided to stop for a quick treat. The smell of fresh waffles and ice cream filled the air. Maria's eyes lit up as she spotted a small ice cream cart on the corner. It was one of those classic carts with a bright umbrella, offering an array of colorful flavors. She knew she had to get one, and with a smile, she hurried over. The vendor behind the cart greeted her with a friendly smile. Maria quickly picked her favorite flavor, mint chocolate chip. Her friends grabbed their ice cream, and they all stood together, chatting and laughing. The atmosphere was so relaxing, and it felt like the perfect day. As they continued to walk, Maria felt carefree, enjoying the moment and the little things around her. Soon, they found themselves near the Grand Palace, a place Maria had heard so much about. She admired the beautiful architecture and the well-kept gardens. As she was taking in the view, her friends started to joke around, teasing each other and making fun of the guards standing at their posts. These guards were dressed in their famous red uniforms and black hats, standing completely still like statues. Maria had always found the guards fascinating, but today she couldn't help but think about how serious they looked. They never moved, never smiled, and never spoke. Her friends, always up for a bit of fun, started daring each other to do silly things in front of the guards. One friend dared another to take a picture with them, while another dared someone to try and make them smile. The group was filled with laughter, but as they passed by one of the guards, something caught Maria's eye. It wasn't just the guard standing there so perfectly still. It was the idea that he was part of a tradition, part of something much bigger than her or anyone else. She felt a sudden rush of boldness. The atmosphere felt light, and her friends were still making playful challenges. They were egging her on, joking that she wouldn't dare do something wild. And that's when Maria's mind came up with an idea that felt exciting and mischievous. She looked at the ice cream in her hand, then at the guard standing motionless in front of her. It was almost like a challenge to her. Wouldn't it be funny, she thought, if I threw my ice cream at him? At that moment, Maria didn't think about the consequences. She was feeling playful, and the thought of doing something unexpected seemed too good to pass up. With a grin on her face, she stepped closer to the guard, ready to pull off the harmless prank. Little did she know, the events that were about to unfold would teach her a lesson she would never forget. The royal guard stood tall and motionless, a figure of complete discipline. He wore the famous red uniform, the one that had become a symbol of British tradition, with a black bearskin hat resting perfectly atop his head. His boots were polished to a shine, and his posture was straight as a rod. He seemed like a living statue, a part of the city's long history. Tourists walked past him, taking pictures, but he never flinched, never moved a muscle. Maria, despite her bold idea, couldn't help but be fascinated by him. She had seen royal guards on TV and in books, but seeing one in person was something else. They were always portrayed as serious, unmoving, and unshakable, almost like they were above the world around them. For a moment, she wondered what it must be like to stand there all day, never speaking, never moving, with hundreds of people passing by. She imagined how difficult it must be to stay so still while the world kept going. The sun was bright, and the crowd around the palace was busy with excited tourists. Some people were laughing and chatting, while others were reading maps or taking pictures. The atmosphere was lively, but there was one person who didn't seem to notice any of it: the guard. His eyes, hidden behind his dark hat, stared straight ahead. He looked calm, but there was a seriousness about him that made Maria wonder what it must be like to live such a life of routine. As Maria stood there, staring at him, she felt a strange mix of curiosity and amusement. She was caught between respecting his role and seeing him as part of the grand picture of the palace, but also feeling like she could break the routine with something fun. Her friends were laughing beside her, still joking about daring each other to do silly things around the guard. They had already made a few funny faces at him, hoping to make him smile, but he didn't react at all. It was in that moment, with the sounds of her friends' laughter in the background and the guard standing in front of her, that Maria's idea suddenly felt more exciting. She felt a rush of confidence. It wasn't just about the prank anymore. It was about testing the limits, doing something daring in front of all the people around her. Everyone was so busy with their own distractions, and the idea of standing out, of being the one to do something unexpected, seemed too fun to ignore. Maria had never really been one to shy away from challenges. In fact, her friends often called her the brave one, the one who would try new things even when others hesitated. This time, however, her challenge wasn't just about having fun with her friends. It was about making a bold statement in a moment of silliness. She could almost hear them egging her on, their voices in her head urging her to do it. As she looked at the guard again, his stoic face didn't show any sign of noticing her. He didn't give any sign of warning. But somehow, Maria felt that in this moment, he was the perfect target for her playful energy. Without thinking too much, she took another step closer, feeling the excitement bubbling inside her. What she didn't know, however, was that her harmless joke was about to take her on a journey that would leave her with a new perspective on respect, tradition, and consequences. Maria could feel her heart racing with excitement as she moved closer to the royal guard. The ice cream in her hand seemed to grow heavier with each step. Her friends were still chatting and laughing behind her, oblivious to what was about to happen. The sun felt warm on her skin, and the breeze was light, but inside, she was buzzing with energy. This was going to be hilarious, she thought. A silly, harmless joke that would leave everyone laughing. Her friends had dared her to do something bold, and Maria was ready to take on the challenge. She knew she had to act fast, before anyone could stop her or remind her how ridiculous it might seem. It was just an ice cream, after all. It wasn't like it was going to hurt anyone. And the guard was just standing there. After all, so stiff and unfeeling, like a robot, never reacting to the crowds around him. How could anyone take him seriously when he didn't even blink? With a deep breath, Maria reached up and held the ice cream cone out in front of her, aiming carefully as if it were some sort of strange target. For a split second, she almost hesitated, questioning whether it was the right thing to do. But then she heard her friend's laughter in the background, urging her on, and that thought quickly disappeared. Maria's mischievous grin spread across her face as she threw the ice cream at the guard. It was a quick, light toss. Nothing too hard, nothing too mean. Just a playful splat. The ice cream hit the guard's chest with a soft thud, and a small cloud of cold mint chocolate chip splattered across his red uniform. Maria immediately felt a rush of excitement. She had done it. She had thrown an ice cream at a royal guard. She half expected him to finally crack a smile or laugh, like a normal person might. But instead, the guard didn't move a muscle. Not even an eyebrow twitched. His face remained completely expressionless, just like before. For a brief moment, Maria was confused. She had thought that maybe the guard would react in some way, even a small sign of surprise or anger. But he didn't. He simply stood there, his gaze fixed straight ahead, completely unaffected by the ice cream that now stained his uniform. The rest of the crowd seemed to stop for a moment too, as if waiting for something to happen. Maria's friends, who had been laughing moments ago, suddenly went quiet. They all stared at the guard, waiting for his response, expecting something dramatic. But there was nothing. Not a word, not a movement, just silence. The thrill of her little prank quickly began to fade as she realized that maybe this wasn't as funny as she had first thought. The moment stretched on, and her excitement was slowly replaced by a sinking feeling in her stomach. It didn't take long for the reality of the situation to start settling in. The guard remained still, but something was different. There was a shift in the air. Maria's playful energy quickly turned into a sense of unease. The consequences of her actions began to creep up on her, though she didn't yet understand how serious they would become. Her heart began to pound in her chest as she glanced around. She could see a couple of other guards in the distance, and one of them was moving toward her. A small crowd had gathered, and some people were whispering to each other, pointing at her. Suddenly, Maria didn't feel so brave anymore. She had crossed a line, and the reality of that was about to hit her harder than she expected. The guard remained perfectly still, not reacting to the ice cream that had just splattered on his uniform. For a few seconds, Maria stood there, frozen in place herself, staring at the mess she had just made. Her heart was pounding in her chest as the quiet stretched on. What had seemed like a fun, light-hearted prank just moments ago now felt like a huge mistake. She looked around nervously, hoping that no one had noticed what she had done. But as she scanned the crowd, she quickly realized that it wasn't just the guard who had noticed. It was the people nearby, too. A few tourists, who had been snapping photos of the guards, now stared at her with raised eyebrows. Some of them whispered to each other, while others shook their heads. Maria felt the eyes of the crowd on her, and the thrill of her joke quickly faded into discomfort. Her friends had gone silent too, and Maria could see that they weren't laughing anymore. They were looking at her with a mixture of surprise and uncertainty, as if they were now unsure about what they had just witnessed. Before Maria could even react to the awkward silence, one of the other guards, who had been standing nearby, started walking toward her. He moved swiftly, his footsteps almost echoing in the quiet moment. As he came closer, Maria felt a knot form in her stomach. She realized, perhaps for the first time, how serious the situation had become. The guard who had been hit with the ice cream still hadn't moved, but Maria could feel the tension in the air. She took a step back, not sure what to do or say. The approaching guard, much taller and more imposing than she had expected, stopped right in front of her. He didn't speak immediately, but his piercing gaze made it clear that he was not amused. Maria opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. She was suddenly aware of how ridiculous she must look, standing there with an ice cream cone in her hand, having just thrown it at one of the most well-known symbols of British tradition. "Do you realize what you've done?" the new guard asked in a low, serious voice. His words weren't angry, but they were firm. There was no hint of humor in his tone. Maria's mouth went dry. She felt her cheeks flush with embarrassment, and she could barely manage a reply. I didn't mean to. I just thought it would be funny," she stammered, but the guard didn't seem to care about her excuses. He simply stood there, staring at her, his expression unchanging. Maria glanced at her friends, hoping one of them would step in and say something to break the awkward silence, but none of them did. They all stood there, too shocked to speak, their eyes darting nervously between Maria and the guard. In that moment, Maria realized that she was completely on her own. No one was going to bail her out of this situation. The guard's gaze was unrelenting, and she began to feel like the weight of what she had done was pressing down on her shoulders. Then, before she could say anything else, the guard motioned for her to follow him. His movement was calm, but there was no mistaking the authority in it. Maria hesitated for a moment, unsure of what would happen next. The last thing she had expected was to be escorted away by a royal guard, and yet here she was, the consequences of her actions unfolding in front of her. "Come with me," he said, his voice steady. The crowd began to whisper again, but Maria didn't pay attention to them. She had no choice now but to follow him. Maria's heart raced as she followed the guard through the crowd. She felt like everyone was watching her, and she could hear whispers as she walked. The weight of the situation was becoming all too real. Her fun little prank had turned into something much more serious. She tried to swallow the lump in her throat, but it was hard to ignore the tension that had settled around her. The guard didn't say a word as they walked, his boots clicking on the pavement with each step. The path seemed to stretch on forever, and Maria felt the distance between her and her friends growing with each passing second. They walked toward a small building behind the palace, which Maria now realized was likely a security office. Her mind raced as she tried to figure out what would happen next. Was she going to be arrested? Was she going to get in trouble with the police? Her thoughts were spinning, but she couldn't focus on any one thing for long. She was too caught up in the immediate panic of the moment. As they approached the door to the building, the guard opened it for her, motioning for her to enter. Maria hesitated for a moment, looking around at the passing tourists and the guards standing at attention, but there was no turning back now. She stepped inside and followed the guard into a small plain room. The air inside was cool, a sharp contrast to the warmth of the outside world. The room was sparsely decorated, with just a desk, a couple of chairs, and a few file cabinets lining the walls. A single light flickered overhead, casting long shadows on the walls. The guard closed the door behind them, and for the first time since the ice cream had hit his uniform, Maria felt completely alone. She sat down in one of the chairs, her hands trembling as she tried to steady her breath. The guard remained standing, his arms crossed, still watching her with that unblinking stare. For a moment, there was complete silence between them. Finally, he spoke. "Do you understand why what you did was wrong?" His voice was calm, but there was an authority in it that Maria couldn't ignore. She looked up at him, her eyes wide with a mix of fear and confusion. "I didn't mean to disrespect anyone," she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "It was just supposed to be a joke." The guard nodded slowly, but his expression didn't soften. "Jokes are fine, but there are lines that shouldn't be crossed. The royal guards are not part of the tourist attractions for you to make fun of. What you did was disrespectful not only to the guards, but to the tradition and the people who hold it dear." Maria shifted uncomfortably in her chair, feeling a sense of guilt wash over her. She hadn't realized how serious the whole thing was. It had seemed harmless at first, just a bit of fun. But now, hearing the guard's words, she could see how her actions might have affected more than just one person. This wasn't a simple joke. It was a violation of something far bigger. "You should understand that this behavior won't be tolerated," the guard continued. "We take these traditions seriously. It's a reminder of the respect we owe to those who have come before us, to the history and the customs that shape our country." Maria nodded slowly, feeling small in the room. She had never expected something so simple, so silly, to lead to such a serious conversation. The guard didn't seem angry, but his words stung. She could feel the weight of his expectations hanging over her, and it was clear that she had crossed a line she hadn't even known existed. As much as she wanted to brush it off, the seriousness of the situation couldn't be ignored. "Do you understand now?" he asked, his voice still calm but firm. "Yes," Maria replied softly, her voice filled with regret. She knew there was no excuse for what she had done, and she knew that this was a lesson she wouldn't soon forget. Maria sat there in the small room, her thoughts swirling as the guard's words echoed in her mind. The weight of the conversation was slowly sinking in. She had come to London with excitement and curiosity, but now she felt like she had made a huge mistake. She had never intended to cause harm, but it was clear that what she had done wasn't just a harmless prank. She had disrupted something much bigger than herself. The royal guard, with his calm authority, had made it clear that there were lines that shouldn't be crossed, and she had crossed one. The silence in the room stretched on as the guard continued to stand with his arms crossed, watching her. Maria shifted nervously in her seat, feeling the discomfort of the situation pressing down on her. She wasn't sure what to expect next. Was this the end of it? Would she have to face some sort of punishment? Her mind raced with questions, but the guard didn't offer any answers. Instead, he simply stood there, unmoving. After what felt like an eternity, the door to the room opened. Maria looked up, startled, and saw a man in a dark suit walk in. He looked more official than the guard, his expression serious but not unfriendly. The man nodded toward the guard, who stepped aside and stood silently in the corner of the room. Maria felt a new wave of anxiety wash over her as the man took a seat across from her. She could sense that things were about to take a different turn. "Miss," the man began, his voice calm but firm, "I understand that you didn't intend to cause any harm with your actions. But as you've been informed, this kind of behavior cannot be ignored." Maria nodded, feeling her stomach tighten. She had no idea what to say. "I'm really sorry," she said, her voice trembling. "I didn't mean to disrespect anyone. It was just supposed to be a joke." The man looked at her for a moment, his eyes studying her face. "I understand that, but you must realize that the Royal Guard represents a tradition and a symbol of our history. The guards are not here for entertainment. They stand as a reminder of our country's values and heritage, and treating them as part of a joke undermines that significance." Maria felt a deep sense of shame as the man spoke. She hadn't thought of it that way at all. To her, it had been a fun, harmless moment, something that would make everyone laugh. But now, she could see how wrong she had been. The guards weren't just statues in uniforms. They were a part of something important, something that people took pride in, and her actions had disrespected that. "I didn't mean to disrespect the tradition," she whispered. "I didn't understand. I'm sorry." The man nodded, his expression softening just slightly. "I can see that you didn't mean any harm, but there are still consequences for your actions. I'll be reporting this to the authorities, and you'll need to pay for the damage done to the guard's uniform." Maria's heart sank. She had never imagined that something as small as an ice cream cone would lead to this kind of trouble. She had only wanted to have a little fun, but now she was faced with the reality of what her actions had caused. "We will be monitoring the situation," the man continued. "But for now, I suggest you take this as a lesson. Respect for tradition, for history, and for the people who uphold it is something that should never be taken lightly. We all have a role to play in preserving the dignity of these symbols." Maria nodded slowly, feeling the full weight of the lesson settle over her. She had learned more than she ever expected to that day. Her apology felt insufficient, but it was all she could offer. As the man stood up to leave, he gave her one last look, as if to remind her of the seriousness of what she had done. The door closed behind him, and Maria was left alone once again. This time, though, she wasn't just reflecting on her actions. She was realizing the impact they had. The lesson she had learned would stay with her long after this moment was over. Maria sat alone in the room for a few more minutes after the man in the dark suit left. The silence seemed louder than ever now. Her mind was racing, and the weight of everything that had happened was sinking in deeper. She had never imagined that a simple act of mischief could lead to this level of trouble. She thought back to the moment when she had thrown the ice cream, how confident and carefree she had felt. Now, the memory of that moment felt distant, almost like it belonged to someone else. She thought about her friends. They had been part of the joke, cheering her on, laughing along with her. Now, Maria couldn't help but wonder if they felt the same sense of guilt and regret that she did. She wished she could go back and undo everything, but it was too late for that. The damage was done. What had seemed like a harmless prank now felt like a serious mistake, one that she would have to live with. The minutes dragged on as she sat there, staring at the floor, lost in her thoughts. She could still feel the eyes of the crowd on her, and she could still hear the guard's words in her head. She had crossed a line, and there was no going back. Her mind kept replaying the scene, wondering if she could have handled it differently. What if she hadn't thrown the ice cream? What if she had just taken a picture, like everyone else? Would that have made a difference? Just then, the door opened again, and the guard from before walked in. He was still standing tall, his posture as straight as ever. This time, though, there was no sternness in his face, just a calm, almost reassuring look. Maria looked up at him, still feeling a sense of unease. "Miss, I'm not here to punish you further," the guard said, his voice steady. You've been spoken to, and you've learned the seriousness of the situation. But I want to make it clear that you have an opportunity to make things right." Maria's eyes widened. "Make things right," she repeated, her voice uncertain. "How?" The guard nodded slowly. "You can choose to show respect and take responsibility for what you've done. We all make mistakes, but how we respond to those mistakes is what matters. The important thing is to understand the impact of your actions." Maria's chest tightened as she listened to his words. She had heard the man in the dark suit mention respect for tradition, but it hadn't really clicked until now. She had only thought about her own actions in the moment, without considering how they might affect others, or the values that the guards represented. Now she understood that respect wasn't just something you gave when it was convenient, it was something you earned through your actions. "Is there anything I can do?" Maria asked quietly, her voice full of sincerity. "I really didn't mean any harm. I just didn't think it through." The guard gave her a small nod, as if he were acknowledging her understanding. "What you can do is simple. Be aware of how your actions affect others, and think before you act. It's not about avoiding mistakes entirely. Everyone makes them. But it's about being responsible for what you do afterward. And that includes learning from this." Maria nodded slowly, feeling a sense of relief wash over her. The guard wasn't treating her like a criminal. Instead, he was helping her see the importance of her actions. It wasn't about punishment, it was about growth. "Thank you," Maria said quietly. "I promise I'll be more thoughtful in the future. I won't forget this lesson." The guard gave a slight smile, a small but meaningful gesture. "That's all we can ask for." He paused for a moment, then added, "You're free to go now. Just remember that respect is something you earn every day, with every choice you make." Maria stood up, feeling a weight lift off her shoulders. She was grateful for the guard's words, and though she knew she had learned an important lesson, she was also glad it was finally time to leave the room. She stepped out of the small building, taking a deep breath, as she re-entered the busy streets of London. The world felt a little different now, but Maria knew that she had learned something valuable. And next time, she would think twice before acting impulsively. Maria stepped back onto the bustling streets of London, the noise of the city filling her ears. It was the same city she had walked through just hours ago, full of excitement and wonder. But now, everything seemed different. The laughter and chatter around her didn't sound as lighthearted as it had before. She was still processing everything that had just happened, the lesson she had learned, and the unexpected turn her day had taken. As she walked, Maria's mind kept returning to the words of the Royal Guard. "Respect is something you earn every day, with every choice you make." Those words kept echoing in her head, and for the first time, she truly understood what they meant. Respect wasn't just about being polite or following rules. It was about thinking beyond yourself and considering how your actions affected others. Maria had always thought of herself as someone who meant well, but she realized that good intentions weren't enough if they weren't backed by thoughtful actions. She looked around at the people rushing by, tourists taking photos, locals going about their daily routines. For a moment, she felt a bit like an outsider, as though her experience had set her apart from everyone else. But she knew that the lesson she had learned wasn't just about the Royal Guards or London. It was about life in general. The world was full of traditions, customs, and people with their own values, and respecting those things was something everyone needed to do, no matter where they were. Maria pulled out her phone and texted her friends. She had been too nervous earlier to say much to them, but now she wanted to share what she had learned. As she typed, she realized that the lesson wasn't just something she could keep to herself. It was something she could share, something that could help others see the importance of thinking before acting. Her phone buzzed a few moments later with a reply from one of her friends. "Wow, that's crazy. I'm glad everything worked out okay. I think we all learned a lesson today." Maria smiled at the message. It felt good to know that they were still there for her, even after everything that had happened. As she continued walking through the streets, she passed by the guards again. They were still standing tall in their iconic uniforms, unmoving, their faces as stoic as ever. But this time, Maria didn't see them as just part of the tourist attractions. She saw them for what they truly represented: a piece of history, a symbol of tradition, and a reminder of the values that people held dear. She stopped for a moment to watch them, feeling a new sense of respect. They weren't there to entertain people, they were there to uphold something greater than themselves. Maria understood that now. The world wasn't just about having fun or making jokes. It was about recognizing the bigger picture and respecting the things that mattered. Maria walked away from the guards, feeling a sense of calm wash over her. She had made a mistake, but she had learned from it. The day had started out with a bit of mischief, but it had ended with something far more valuable: understanding. She couldn't change the past, but she could move forward, knowing that she would never forget the lesson she had learned. As the sun began to set over London, Maria felt a quiet sense of peace. She had made it through the day, and though it hadn't gone as planned, she knew that it had been an experience that would stay with her forever. And next time, she would remember to think twice before making a decision, no matter how small it seemed.